What happens when a powerful black woman owner of a multi-billion-dollar company and the very owner of a private jet is mistaken for someone who doesn't belong? What happens when a flight attendant's snap judgment escalates into a shocking act of violence at 40,000 feet? This is not just a story about a slap. It's about the invisible barriers and deep-seated biases that persist in the most exclusive corners of our world. It's about dignity stripped away in an instant, and the quiet strength it takes to reclaim it. Set aboard a private jet flying from New York to Los Angeles. This story follows Ariel Knox, a brilliant, calm, and fiercely determined billionaire whose life is forever changed by a moment of unthinkable prejudice. As the incident reverberates through courtrooms, boardrooms, and social media, it sparks a fight not just for justice, but for systemic change. Who really owns the skies, and who decides who belongs? Stay with us as we unravel this powerful tale of injustice, resilience, and transformation. If this story moves you, hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories that matter. The cabin was quiet in the way that only first class can be: soft lighting, muted conversation, the occasional clink of crystal glassware. Outside the windows, the sun had just started to dip below the New York skyline, casting long shadows across the tarmac of JFK Airport. The private jet sat waiting, sleek and almost regal, its engines humming with a quiet promise of distant horizons. Ariel Knox stepped aboard without fanfare. She was not the kind of person who demanded attention. Her attire was practical, a well-worn gray cashmere sweater, black slacks, and leather boots dusted faintly with the red earth of West Texas. Her hair was pulled back into a neat bun, revealing a face marked by soft lines that spoke of quiet strength and wisdom beyond her years. No jewels, no designer logos, just the steady calm of someone who had built her world on purpose and perseverance. She moved down the aisle of the Altura One, the private jet operated by Skylinks Charters, and settled into seat 2A by the window. The cabin smelled faintly of leather and citrus, a scent that had become familiar over years of travel. As she buckled her seatbelt, she glanced around with a quiet observance that missed nothing. From the galley, Callie Brent watched her with a flicker of something like disbelief. Callie was 32, with platinum blonde hair pulled into a perfect French twist, her uniform impeccable and her posture rigid with the pride of her role as a flight attendant. To Callie, the first-class cabin was her domain, a world of privilege she guarded with unspoken vigilance. And to her, Ariel Knox did not fit the picture. There was something about the way Ariel carried herself that made Callie uneasy, even suspicious. No designer bags, no sparkling accessories, no air of wealth beyond the obvious private jet boarding. Callie's eyes narrowed slightly as she watched Ariel pull out a small leather-bound notebook and begin to write quietly, as if preparing for a meeting Ariel had no intention of announcing. Callie's thoughts were sharp and unforgiving. This was probably one of those assistants or tech workers, someone who thought first class was a perk she was entitled to. Callie had seen it before: people trying to slip past the velvet ropes of exclusivity, trying to bask in reflected glamour. But Ariel Knox was not who she appeared to be, or so Callie thought. The cabin crew had already made their rounds, serving sparkling water and champagne to the usual jet-setting clientele. A hedge fund couple in seats 2B and 2C chatted softly, their laughter floating across the cabin like delicate glass bubbles. Callie moved to refill their glasses, her smile warm and practiced, but her eyes never left Ariel. When she passed Ariel's seat, Callie's smile faded into something cooler. She paused just long enough for Ariel to look up and ask softly for a glass of sparkling water. The response was clipped and businesslike. "Not until we're airborne," Callie said. Ariel's lips pressed together in a thin line, but she said nothing. Instead, she settled back into her seat, folding her hands quietly in her lap. Her eyes scanned the cabin, briefly connecting with a young black woman seated in economy class who glanced back with a subtle nod of acknowledgement. It was a small moment of solidarity in a room that preferred to ignore the presence of people like them. Ariel took a slow breath and pulled out her phone. A message to her chief of staff blinked on the screen I'm on. "We'll see what culture lives here." She wondered silently how many times she had flown this route only to feel invisible in plain sight. It was a familiar feeling being seen, but not recognized. Acknowledged only as an outsider in spaces that weren't built for her. The engines began to rumble softly, the captain's voice coming over the intercom to announce imminent departure. Ariel tucked her notebook away and gazed out the window as the jet began to taxi. The city lights blurred into streaks of gold and white. Somewhere in the distance, planes took off and landed as if choreographed by a quiet hand. Callie returned with the now sparkling water, placing the glass carefully on Ariel's tray table, but her eyes stayed cold. The service was professional, but not warm. It was clear she was marking Ariel as someone who did not belong. A silent message carried in the tone and the manner. As the flight climbed, Ariel's thoughts drifted. She thought of the wind farms in West Texas, where she had spent the last 3 days, hiking through dusty fields under a relentless sun. Her clothes were still carrying traces of that world, the grit of work and the sweat of ambition. She was more comfortable in those fields than in this plush cabin where luxury was expected and power flaunted. Still, she had a job to do here. Her company, Virion Technologies, was at the forefront of clean energy innovation. She was a billionaire by some measures, but preferred to think of herself as a builder, a quiet force pushing the world toward a better future. The Altura One was not just her transport, it was a symbol of her success, a tool of her influence, and today, a stage. Somewhere deep inside, a small voice reminded her to remain patient, to observe, to gather. This flight was not just a journey across the country. It was a test, a glimpse behind the polished veneer of the service industry that catered to the world's elite. Ariel's hands folded in her lap once more. Her gaze returned to the window as clouds passed beneath the plane. Soft and unyielding. She wondered how many others had flown this route, sat in this cabin, and never been seen for who they really were. In the galley, Callie caught her reflection in the mirror. For a moment, she paused, the mask slipping just a fraction. Then she squared her shoulders and prepared for the next round of service. She was the gatekeeper here, the custodian of privilege, and she would do everything in her power to keep it that way. But beneath the surface, a quiet storm was beginning to gather. The cabin lights dimmed slightly as the Altura One leveled off, settling into the steady hum of cruising altitude. Outside the window, the sprawling patchwork of the American Midwest stretched endlessly beneath the wing, a quiet reminder of the miles still to come before the jet touched down in Los Angeles. Inside the cabin, the atmosphere was calm but charged with unspoken tension. Callie Brent moved through the aisle with practiced ease. Her smile was flawless as she approached the couple seated in 2B and 2C, two hedge fund managers dressed in tailored suits that whispered of success. She poured champagne into their crystal flutes, her tone warm and solicitous, every movement choreographed to perfection. This was her stage, and she had mastered the art of making the wealthy feel at home in the sky. But when she turned to Ariel Knox, The difference in her demeanor was palpable. The smile that had been so radiant for the others now thinned into something more guarded. "Without making eye contact," Callie said. "Sparkling water will be served after dinner service begins." Ariel lifted her eyes slowly, meeting Callie's gaze with quiet calm. "I would appreciate a glass now, if possible." Callie hesitated, a flicker of irritation crossing her face before she plastered on her polite mask. "I'm sorry, ma'am. That's airline policy." The moment lingered longer than necessary. The other passengers, sensing the awkwardness, diverted their attention back to their own conversations. But Ariel noticed the subtle ways Callie's eyes flickered away, the tightness in her jaw. This wasn't about policy. It was about something else, something far less professional. Ariel's mind traced back to other flights, other moments like this one. The way the crew would look past her, fail to offer the same courtesies extended to others. The way she would be mistaken for the assistant or the nanny rather than the person who wrote the checks that kept these jets in the air. She sipped the water that had been reluctantly brought a few minutes later and leaned back in her seat. The polished veneer of first class suddenly felt brittle and thin, like a fragile shell waiting to crack. Her thoughts drifted to the young woman seated in economy, the one who had nodded at her earlier. Ariel had caught a glimpse of her name tag during boarding Jada Miller, a student pilot training through a scholarship program. Ariel smiled softly to herself, knowing Jada was one of the reasons she had fought so hard to reach this point, to make sure someone like her could dream without barriers. As the flight continued, Callie continued her rounds. She checked on the wealthy couple with genuine attentiveness, offering them the finest selections from the wine list, engaging in light, flattering conversation. Meanwhile, her interactions with Ariel remained transactional and cold. At one point, Ariel pressed the call button. Callie appeared promptly, her expression professional but guarded. "May I help you?" she asked, voice smooth but distant. Ariel regarded her for a moment before speaking softly. "I would like to confirm my itinerary for the connecting flight in Los Angeles. I was informed there might be a change." Callie glanced at the manifest on her tablet, fingers tapping the screen briefly before nodding. "Yes, ma'am. Your connecting flight is confirmed as scheduled." "Thank you," Ariel replied, voice steady but carrying an undercurrent of something resolute. Callie hesitated, then asked, "If there is nothing else?" "I will be serving dinner shortly." Ariel nodded. "That will be all for now." Callie turned and walked away, but the tension in her shoulders was unmistakable. "In the galley?" Callie's eyes flickered to her reflection in the polished metal surfaces. For a moment, she saw the image of a woman caught between worlds, the world she worked so hard to belong to, and the unspoken prejudices she couldn't fully escape. The flight attendant role was more than a job for Callie. It was her claim to status, to a life that was orderly and controlled. Yet here was Ariel Knox, a quiet storm disrupting that order with nothing more than her presence. Back in her seat, Ariel closed her eyes briefly and let her thoughts wander. She remembered the long hours spent in boardrooms where she was the only woman of color, the only one who had come from nothing. She thought of the countless times she had been underestimated, dismissed, or ignored. But she had learned that strength often came not from raising your voice, but from maintaining your dignity in the face of disrespect. She opened her eyes and gazed at the cabin. There was a strange kind of poetry in this moment, a small, quiet rebellion. Ariel wasn't here to prove anything. She was here to observe, to understand the subtle dynamics of power and privilege that played out in these enclosed spaces miles above the ground. Her phone vibrated softly. A message from Noel Stratton, her chief of staff. "How's the culture?" Ariel typed back. "It's a test, we all know, but refused to name. Dinner service began. The meal was exquisite, a carefully curated menu designed to impress. The wealthy passengers indulged in filet mignon and truffle risotto, savoring every bite. Callie served them with practiced grace, laughing at their jokes, offering personal recommendations. When she reached Ariel, the meal was placed silently. The tray left with a slight flick of the wrist. Ariel ate quietly, her mind elsewhere. She noticed a few glances from other passengers, curious, cautious, some tinged with admiration, but no one approached her. No one offered the easy camaraderie extended to others. The flight attendant's eyes met hers briefly once more. Callie's gaze was sharp, measuring. In that moment, Ariel recognized the invisible wall between them, not of class, not of money, but of something far more stubborn and insidious. As the meal ended and the cabin lights dimmed further, Ariel allowed herself a small smile. This flight was far from over. The real journey, the one toward change and reckoning, was just beginning. Her hands folded in her lap. She wasn't looking for confrontation. She wasn't looking for recognition. She was here to hold a mirror up to a world that too often refused to see. And the reflection was already beginning to crack. The gentle hum of the Altura One's engines was the only sound as the plane cruised steadily toward the west coast. The cabin lights softened, casting a warm glow over the polished wood accents and plush leather seats. Outside, the sky was a canvas of twilight colors, fading slowly from deep blue to black. Inside, a different kind of tension was building, subtle but undeniable. Ariel Knox sat quietly in seat 2A, the window beside her revealing nothing but stars and darkness. Her posture was calm, composed, a study in control. Yet beneath that calm surface, her mind was alert, watching, listening, absorbing the unspoken dynamics unfolding around her. Callie Brent moved through the cabin with the effortless grace of someone accustomed to being in command of the skies. Her smile was still there, but it was practiced, measured. When she reached the two hedge fund managers in seats 2B and 2C, it bloomed genuine and warm. She poured champagne, offered recommendations from the wine list, and laughed softly at their jokes. But when Callie's gaze met Ariel's, her expression shifted. It became cool, clipped, distant. She moved past Ariel, leaving a glass of sparkling water untouched on the side table without a word. Ariel's eyes followed Callie's retreating figure, her lips pressing into a thin line. The message was clear. Here, she was not to be served like the others. She was different, an outsider in the very space her success had helped create. The flight attendants gathered briefly near the galley, exchanging quiet words and glances. Ariel could hear snippets of conversation words like, "Not sure she belongs," and "looks out of place." The unspoken judgment hung in the air like an invisible fog. She thought of the countless times she had encountered the same feeling in boardrooms and social events. The eyes that looked past her, the questions she wasn't asked, the assumptions that followed her like a shadow. She had learned to navigate it all with grace, to smile, to nod, to keep moving forward. But this was different. This was close and confined, with nowhere to escape. Callie approached again, this time carrying a tray with the evening meal. She placed it carefully in front of the couple, her movements fluid and flawless. When she reached Ariel, she paused, just long enough for the air to thicken with anticipation. "Would you care for dinner?" Ma'am Callie asked, her voice polite but edged with something sharper beneath the surface. "Yes, thank you," Ariel replied softly. Callie's eyes flicked to her tablet. "I'll bring your selections shortly." Minutes passed, and Ariel's meal arrived carefully plated, beautifully presented. But the service was brisk, lacking the warmth extended to others. She ate slowly, savoring the flavors, but feeling the sting of exclusion all the same. Nearby passengers whispered softly, casting occasional glances her way. Some were curious, others uncomfortable. One young woman, seated several rows back in economy class, caught Ariel's eye again. Jada Miller, the student pilot, gave her a small smile. Ariel returned it, a silent gesture of solidarity. The flight attendant's rounds continued, but Ariel noticed something else, a hushed tone among the crew when they thought she wasn't listening. Frustration disguised as professionalism, the kind of tension born not from anything she had done, but simply from who she was. She reached for her phone under the tray table and typed a quick message to Noel Stratton. "It's a test we all know, but refuse to name." She watched as the plane's path curved slightly southward, crossing over vast stretches of farmland and rolling hills. She wondered how many others on board were unaware of the subtle battle taking place in their midst. A knock at her door jolted her from her thoughts. It was Callie, standing just outside the lavatory. Her face was composed, but there was a tightness around her eyes that Ariel had not seen before. "May I assist you?" Callie asked. Ariel nodded and stepped forward. "I wanted to confirm my connecting flight details for Los Angeles." Callie swiped her tablet and nodded. "Confirmed as scheduled." "Thank you," Ariel said. The silence stretched. Callie hesitated, then asked, "Is there anything else I can do for you?" Ariel looked into her eyes, steady and unyielding. "I would appreciate the same courtesy and respect afforded to the other passengers." Callie's lips pressed together, the polite mask slipping for a moment. "Of course, ma'am." But the moment was gone as quickly as it had come. Callie turned and walked away, her shoulders stiff. Ariel felt a small surge of frustration, but she swallowed it. She had learned long ago that anger, especially in moments like this, was a luxury she could not afford. She thought of her mother's voice, steady and unwavering in her memory. "Your skin will be the first thing they see, but never the last thing you reveal." The plane's intercom crackled as the captain's voice announced a slight turbulence ahead. Passengers settled back. The cabin lights dimmed further, and the hum of the engines filled the silence. Ariel closed her eyes briefly, focusing on her breathing. She reminded herself why she was here, not to demand recognition or confrontation, but to observe and, when the time came, to act. Callie made her final round through the cabin before the lights were turned off for the night. Her eyes met Ariel's one last time. There was something unresolved in that look, a mixture of resentment and uncertainty. As the cabin grew quiet, Ariel allowed herself a small, private smile. The flight was more than just a journey across the country. It was a quiet battlefield where dignity and prejudice met head-on, and she was ready. The cabin was dim, bathed in the soft glow of overhead lights as the Altura One soared above the patchwork quilt of states beneath it. Outside, the world was vast and silent. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with unspoken words and mounting tension. Ariel Knox stood up slowly, stretching the stiffness from her legs. The tight confines of the first-class cabin felt suddenly oppressive, like the walls were closing in. She made her way toward the lavatory at the rear of the cabin, moving with the quiet confidence of someone who knew exactly where she belonged, even if others did not see it. As she passed by the galley, Callie Brent was there, busy arranging trays and polishing glasses. When Ariel approached, Callie stepped forward, a guarded expression on her face. "Ms. Knox," Callie said, voice low but sharp. I need to speak with you. Ariel stopped and turned, meeting Callie's eyes directly. There was a flicker of something unreadable in Callie's gaze, but it quickly vanished beneath the mask of professionalism. What is it? Ariel asked evenly. Callie hesitated, then spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. I've had enough of your attitude. You're making this cabin uncomfortable for everyone. Ariel's brow furrowed slightly, but her voice remained calm. I have done nothing but ask for the same respect as every other passenger. Callie's eyes narrowed. You think just because you own this plane, you can behave however you want. The words landed with a weight Ariel had felt before an accusation, a challenge, a dismissal wrapped in entitlement. I don't behave, Ariel said softly. I exist. Callie's jaw tightened. The polite veneer cracked, revealing a flash of rage. You don't belong here. Ariel took a step closer, steady and deliberate. I belong wherever I choose. Callie's hand shot out before Ariel could react. The slap was sudden and sharp. The sound echoed through the cabin, breaking the fragile calm like a thunderclap. Passengers froze mid-bite and conversation. A young child near the back whimpered softly. The captain's voice cut through the silence as he emerged from the cockpit, his face tightening with concern. Ariel touched her cheek gently, feeling the sting where Callie's palm had landed. Her eyes met Callie's with a quiet fire that brooked no argument. For a moment, no one spoke. Then, Noel Stratton appeared at the back of the cabin, his steps brisk and purposeful. He moved toward the scene, his presence commanding attention without effort. Callie, Noel said, voice low but firm, step away from Ms. Knox. Callie's eyes darted toward Noel, confusion and fear flickering in them. She stepped back reluctantly. Noel turned to Ariel, his expression a mixture of concern and determination. Are you all right? Ariel nodded slowly, her voice steady. I am, but we have a problem. The cabin was silent except for the soft hum of the engines. Passengers glanced at each other, whispering in hushed tones. The atmosphere had shifted palpably, from polite decorum to a simmering unease. Noel's gaze swept the room, taking in the stunned faces of crew and passengers alike. This is unacceptable. Callie stood rigid, her face pale. For a moment, she looked like a woman caught in the headlights of a storm she had unleashed. The captain approached, his voice carrying the weight of authority. Callie Brent, please report to the galley. Callie nodded, her legs trembling slightly as she walked away. Ariel returned to her seat, her movements composed but her mind racing. She placed a hand over the slight reddening on her cheek and closed her eyes for a moment, breathing deeply. The flight attendant's outburst was not just an isolated act of aggression. It was a symptom of a deeper sickness, a reflection of prejudice embedded in layers of unspoken assumptions and biases. As the cabin slowly settled back into its rhythms, Ariel's thoughts turned inward. She thought of the countless times she had been underestimated, dismissed, or outright ignored. Each moment had been a test of her resolve, a challenge to her dignity. She had learned that strength was not about confrontation or raising one's voice. It was about maintaining grace in the face of disrespect, about standing firm when others sought to push her down. The plane's gentle sway was a reminder that despite turbulence, the journey must continue. Later, in the galley. Callie sat alone, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. She replayed the incident over and over in her mind, each time feeling a growing sense of dread. What had started as a moment of frustration had spiraled into something far beyond her control. Ariel's presence on the plane had unsettled her in ways she hadn't anticipated. The quiet dignity, The unwavering calm, it challenged everything Callie thought she knew about power and entitlement. Meanwhile, Ariel pulled out her notebook and began to write. Her words were precise, capturing the details of the encounter, the emotions it stirred, and the broader implications. This was not just a personal affront. It was a moment that demanded reckoning. She thought of the young pilot, Jada Miller, and the countless others who looked up to her. This moment would become part of the story they needed to hear, the story of resilience, of standing firm, and of demanding respect in every space. As the flight continued toward its destination, Ariel sat back, her eyes fixed on the dark sky beyond the window. The slap was a shock, yes, but it had also been a catalyst. She was ready for what came next. The moment Ariel Knox sat back down, the cabin seemed to hold its breath. The echo of the slap still lingered in the air like a sharp note suspended in silence. Passengers glanced around nervously, eyes wide with shock and confusion. Conversations had stopped. Phones were discreetly raised, capturing the scene unfolding in real time. At the rear of the cabin, the captain cleared his throat and stepped forward. His face was grave, etched with the experience of decades in the skies. His voice, when he spoke, was firm but respectful. Ladies and gentlemen, please remain calm. An incident has occurred. We are taking the necessary steps to address it. The passengers murmured softly, curiosity and unease mixing in the air. Before anyone could say more, a man appeared from the back of the cabin, striding confidently toward the front. His tailored suit, neat hair, and calm demeanor marked him as someone accustomed to authority. This was Noel Stratton, Ariel's chief of staff, a steady presence who carried with him the weight of unspoken power. He moved directly to Ariel's side and placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly. Ariel nodded, meeting his eyes with a steady gaze. "I am," she replied. Then, addressing the cabin, she added, "There is something everyone should know." Noel reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a sleek tablet. He tapped the screen, and a clear, official-looking document appeared, a passenger manifest with the heading Altura 1. At the top was a name in bold letters, Ariel Knox, owner and primary stakeholder. A hush fell over the cabin. Noel spoke clearly, his voice carrying across the rows of seats. "This is Ms. Ariel Knox. She is not just a passenger. She owns this aircraft. She is the largest investor in Altura Air and founder of Virion Technologies, the company that funds much of this operation." A few passengers gasped, others whispered in disbelief. Callie Brent's face paled. She took a step back, her eyes wide with shock and something else, fear, perhaps, or regret. "That's not possible." Callie stammered. She's not. No," Noel said firmly. "She is exactly who she says she is." For a moment, no one spoke. The gravity of the revelation settled over the cabin like a heavy fog. Ariel took a slow breath and addressed everyone with quiet authority. "I understand that my appearance might not fit your expectations. I know that assumptions were made and boundaries crossed. But I am here to remind us all that dignity is not reserved for those who look a certain way or dress a certain way. It is a right, not a privilege." The cabin remained still, the usual hum of travel replaced by the profound weight of truth. Ariel looked at Callie directly, her eyes steady and unflinching. This incident is not just about a slap. It is about a failure to see beyond stereotypes, about a culture that allows disrespect to flourish under the guise of professionalism. Callie swallowed hard, her earlier confidence eroding. Noel stepped forward again. We will be addressing this matter thoroughly once we land. Until then, I ask for calm and respect." The captain nodded in agreement and returned to the cockpit, leaving the cabin to digest what had just been revealed. Ariel returned to her seat, her hand still lightly touching the spot where Callie's palm had struck her. The sting was fading, but the impact ran deeper. She thought of the countless times she had been underestimated, the dismissals and condescensions disguised as small talk or polite smiles. But now, the mask had slipped, and the truth was in full view. The cabin gradually returned to a subdued quiet. Phones were lowered. Passengers looked at Ariel with new eyes, some with admiration, others with discomfort. Jada Miller, the young pilot in economy, caught Ariel's gaze and gave her a small, respectful nod. Ariel smiled faintly in return, grateful for that small moment of connection. As the flight continued, Ariel's mind was racing. The slap was a spark, but the fire it ignited was what mattered most. This was a reckoning, a chance to challenge the systems and attitudes that had allowed such moments to happen. Her phone buzzed softly. A message from Noel. "They are watching. Stay strong." Ariel typed back simply, "I will." For all the challenges ahead, she was ready, not with anger or vengeance, but with purpose and resolve. The night deepened outside. Stars scattered across the sky like distant beacons. Inside the cabin, a new light was beginning to shine, a light of truth, dignity, and change. The cabin felt strangely silent after the revelation. Passengers reclined slightly in their seats, some avoiding eye contact, others stealing glances at Ariel Knox as if seeing her for the first time. The weight of the moment lingered, an invisible pulse of tension vibrating through the air. Ariel sat quietly, fingers tracing the edge of her notebook. She was calm on the surface, but inside a storm was brewing, a mixture of frustration, resolve, and a deep well of weary strength. Her thoughts raced, flipping through memories of battles fought and won, moments when she had been forced to prove herself again and again simply because of the color of her skin. Her mind returned to her mother's words, spoken softly years ago on a chilly evening when Ariel had doubted her path. "They will see your skin before your soul, but never let that define you." The words were a balm and a challenge, one she had carried like a secret armor. Across the cabin, Callie Brent stood near the galley, her back rigid and her face pale. The anger that had propelled her into the slap was now replaced by a sinking sense of dread. She replayed the incident over and over in her mind, the shock on Ariel's face, the gasps from passengers, the heavy silence that followed. Callie had always thought she was justified. After all, Ariel had seemed defiant, dismissive even. The woman's casual appearance and quiet demeanor had unsettled her more than she cared to admit. But now, faced with the undeniable truth of Ariel's identity, Callie felt the crushing weight of her actions. She sank onto a stool in the galley, head in her hands. The professional mask she had worn for years cracked and crumbled, revealing vulnerability she had long buried. Back in her seat, Ariel's thoughts drifted to the young pilot she had seen earlier, Jada Miller. The girl's quiet strength and hopeful eyes reminded her of why she was here. For every Jada, there were countless others who faced invisible barriers, dismissed or ignored because of who they were. Ariel took out her phone and began typing a message to Noel Stratton. "Prepare for what comes next. This is bigger than us." Noel's reply was immediate. "We're ready." The flight continued, but the normal rhythms were disrupted. Passengers whispered quietly, some taking to their devices to share updates on social media. The hashtag #ArielKnox began trending in certain circles, sparking conversations about race, privilege, and respect. Meanwhile, in the galley, Callie's phone buzzed relentlessly. Messages from co-workers ranged from supportive to accusatory. The crew was divided, some condemning her actions outright, others offering excuses and justifications. Callie stared at the screen, the enormity of what she had done settling heavily on her shoulders. She was no longer just a flight attendant. She was the center of a scandal that threatened to unravel her career and reputation. As the hours passed, Ariel found herself reflecting on the layers of complexity in moments like these. The slap was a physical act, but it was also a symbol of systemic failure, a manifestation of bias that permeated every level of society. Her mind wandered to the countless conversations she had had with corporate leaders, lawmakers, and activists. They spoke of change, of progress, but often the reality was slower, messier, more resistant. Ariel knew that to make a real difference, she had to move beyond the moment. This was a call to action. She penned a few lines in her notebook, thoughts flowing freely. We cannot fix a system by punishing its parts. We must rebuild from the foundation up. The plane began its descent, lights blinking in the distance as the sprawling city of Los Angeles emerged beneath a blanket of night. Ariel looked out the window, the sprawling lights a reminder of the vastness of the challenge ahead. As the wheels touched the runway and the cabin prepared to disembark, Ariel steadied herself. There would be meetings, statements, legal consultations. The path ahead would be difficult and fraught with resistance. But she was ready, because this was more than a slap. This was a turning point. The moment the Altura One touched down in Los Angeles, the calm veneer of the flight shattered into a whirlwind of consequences. As the cabin doors opened, security personnel boarded swiftly and discreetly. Callie Brent, once the composed flight attendant who prided herself on order and control, was now escorted off the plane. Her steps were uneven, a mixture of shame and panic clouding her features. Passengers disembarked, many pulling out their phones to check social media. The video that had been taken during the incident was already circulating rapidly. Flight attendant slaps black woman on private jet read the headlines on various news apps. Comments flooded in from around the world, expressions of outrage, support, and deep reflection. Ariel Knox moved with the quiet dignity she was known for. Her expression was calm but resolute. As she stepped off the jet, cameras flashed and reporters murmured just beyond the secured perimeter. Yet, Ariel paid them no mind. Her focus was on the bigger picture, the movement she was about to spark. Back at the airport terminal, Ariel and her chief of staff, Noel Stratton, convened in a private conference room. Noel was already reviewing the initial reports, legal briefs, and social media trends. The video has gone viral, Noel said, his voice steady despite the gravity of the situation. Public opinion is overwhelmingly on our side, but the airline is scrambling. Ariel nodded. This isn't just about me or Callie. It's about the culture that allowed this to happen. Noel tapped his tablet, bringing up a dossier. There have been at least 3 prior complaints against Callie for unprofessional conduct, all dismissed or quietly handled. Ariel's eyes narrowed slightly. And the training protocols, no updates since 2012. Diversity and inclusion modules completed in minutes, if at all. She let out a long breath. That's the real failure. Meanwhile, Altura Air's CEO, Darren Beller, was on the phone in his office. His voice was measured but tense as he fielded questions from his PR team. We need a rapid response, Darren said. Contain the narrative. This was an isolated incident. Callie Brent acted alone. Our company does not condone such behavior. But internally, Darren knew the truth was more complicated. The incident was a symptom of systemic problems that had gone unaddressed for years. Back in the conference room, Ariel was drafting her statement. It was firm, unyielding, but measured. "We demand accountability," she read aloud. "Not just for this incident, but for the culture that allowed it. This is a call for real, lasting change." Outside, the story continued to unfold. News outlets ran pieces examining Altura Air's hiring practices, the racial disparities among its staff, and the company's lackluster diversity initiatives. Social media was ablaze with discussions about race, privilege, and respect in the luxury travel industry. Hashtags like "Respect in the Skies" and "Altura Accountability" trended alongside Ariel Knox. The pressure was mounting. At the same time, Ariel's personal phone was inundated with messages from supporters, activists, and allies. Many shared stories of their own experiences with discrimination in various industries. Their voices were united in calling for justice and reform. Despite the chaos, Ariel remained focused. She knew that while the slap had drawn attention, it was the aftermath, the exposure of systemic failure, that held the power to create real change. In the days that followed, Ariel appeared in interviews and panels, speaking candidly about her experience. She emphasized the need to move beyond individual blame and address the root causes of discrimination. "We can't simply punish one person and hope the problem disappears," she said during a televised town hall. "We must examine the systems that perpetuate bias and exclusion." Her words resonated widely, sparking conversations across boardrooms, classrooms, and social media platforms. Meanwhile, Callie Brent's career was unraveling. She was suspended pending investigation and faced mounting public criticism. Former colleagues distanced themselves, and job offers disappeared. The life she had carefully built, the image of professionalism and belonging, was crumbling. In quiet moments, Callie wrestled with guilt and denial. She replayed the incident, questioning what had led her to that moment, and whether she could ever make amends. For Ariel, the journey was just beginning. The incident was a catalyst, igniting a movement that demanded more than apologies. It demanded accountability, transformation, and above all, dignity for all who shared the skies. The corporate headquarters of Altura Air was a sleek glass tower that gleamed under the morning sun like a beacon of modernity and success. Yet inside its walls, the atmosphere was anything but calm. In the spacious conference room on the top floor, a crisis meeting was underway. Darren Beller, the CEO, sat at the head of the polished mahogany table, his expression tight and guarded. Around him were his executive team, public relations specialists, legal advisors, and board members. The air was thick with tension. "This situation is spiraling faster than we anticipated," Darren said, voice low but urgent. "The video of the incident has gone viral globally. Our stock is already dipping." A communications officer chimed in. "We need to control the narrative. This has to be framed as an isolated incident. Callie Brent acted alone. She has been suspended pending investigation." Darren shook his head. "That's not enough. There are already reports surfacing about prior complaints against Callie and systemic issues in our training and hiring practices. This goes deeper than one employee." One of the board members, an older man with sharp eyes, spoke up. "We need a comprehensive audit of our diversity and inclusion policies. The public won't accept excuses." Darren nodded, a flicker of unease passing through him. "I want a full review immediately. Every complaint, every training module, every hiring decision for the past 5 years. I want transparency." Meanwhile, Ariel Knox's legal team was hard at work. Marissa Yun, a formidable attorney known for her relentless pursuit of justice, was reviewing the case. The evidence was overwhelming: a clear act of assault witnessed by multiple passengers, captured on video, and compounded by a history of unchecked discriminatory behavior within Altura Air's ranks. Marissa had prepared a bold legal strategy. This is not just about Ms. Knox being slapped, she explained to Ariel and Noel. It's about holding the corporation accountable for fostering an environment where such behavior was tolerated. We will sue for negligent hiring, inadequate training, and a corporate culture that allowed discrimination to thrive. Ariel nodded slowly. I don't want this to be about vengeance. I want it to be about reform, about creating spaces where no one is judged by their skin or their appearance. The legal team worked tirelessly to gather documentation, depositions, and internal communications. They uncovered emails from managers dismissing complaints as overly sensitive and training sessions that were mere formalities, completed in less than 2 minutes by most staff. The public was hungry for answers. News outlets delved into Altura Air's corporate culture, revealing a predominantly white flight crew, with people of color underrepresented and often sidelined. Stories emerged of other passengers who had experienced subtle and not-so-subtle discrimination aboard the airline's flights. Social media amplified these voices, turning the story into a national conversation about race, power, and privilege in the luxury travel industry. Inside Altura Air, the pressure was mounting. The board demanded swift action to prevent further damage. Darren Beller found himself caught between defending the company and acknowledging its failures. He convened a press conference. Flanked by his senior executives, Altura Air's committed to the highest standards of service and respect for all our passengers, Darren announced. We condemn the actions of one employee and are taking immediate steps to address systemic issues within our company. Despite the carefully crafted words, the damage had been done. The public's trust had been shaken. At the same time, Ariel was making moves to ensure her influence was felt beyond the courtroom. She reached out to organizations dedicated to diversity in aviation, offering funding and support. She began assembling a coalition of industry leaders committed to real change. One evening, as Ariel reviewed the growing list of supporters and allies, she felt a quiet sense of hope. This was bigger than her personal experience. It was about transforming an entire industry. Meanwhile, Callie Brent's world was collapsing. She was placed on indefinite leave and faced scrutiny from regulators and the media. Job prospects evaporated as word of the incident spread. Former colleagues distanced themselves, unwilling to be associated with the controversy. In private moments, Callie grappled with the consequences of her actions. She oscillated between anger, denial, and remorse. The professional image she had built over years was shattered. Yet even as her career faltered, Ariel's resolve only grew stronger. The battle was far from over, but the momentum was undeniable. Change was coming. The legal battle that followed was anything but ordinary. Ariel Knox, known for her calm and measured approach in the boardrooms of Viren Technologies, now found herself at the forefront of a fight that extended far beyond one incident on a private jet. This was a battle against systemic injustice, entrenched bias, and corporate complacency that had allowed such discrimination to persist unchecked for far too long. Marissa Yun, Ariel's lead attorney, was a force of nature. In the sleek conference room of their legal firm, she laid out the case to a team of junior lawyers. This lawsuit is about accountability at every level, she said, her voice steady and commanding. We are not just suing Callie Brent for assault. We are suing Altura Air and Skylinks charters for negligent hiring, failure to train, and fostering a hostile work environment. Ariel listened intently, her fingers folded together. She knew that the courtroom would be a battlefield. But this was necessary. It's not personal, she said quietly. It's about changing a culture. The lawsuit was filed swiftly and publicly. Media outlets picked up the story immediately, framing it as a landmark case that could reshape the aviation industry's approach to diversity and inclusion. The complaint detailed how Altura Air had failed to enforce meaningful training, ignored multiple complaints against employees, and maintained hiring practices that overwhelmingly favored white candidates. Internal documents obtained by Ariel's legal team revealed a troubling pattern. Complaints about discriminatory behavior were routinely dismissed as isolated incidents or downplayed as misunderstandings. Diversity and inclusion training was cursory at best, often nothing more than a checkbox exercise. The data showed a glaring disparity in hiring and promotion rates between white employees and people of color. The courtroom proceedings were tense and highly publicized. Altura Air's defense attorneys attempted to frame Callie Brent as a rogue employee, acting outside the bounds of company policy. They argued that the company had taken swift action by suspending her and promised reforms to prevent future incidents, but Marissa Yun was relentless. She presented testimony from former employees who described a toxic culture where complaints were ignored, and employees of color faced constant microaggressions. She introduced expert analysis on the systemic barriers embedded in the company's hiring and training processes. Ariel's presence in the courtroom was dignified and composed. She did not seek the spotlight, but when she spoke, her words carried weight. "This case is not about punishment," she said during her testimony. "It is about accountability and the responsibility of corporations to foster environments of respect and equality. We must dismantle the systems that allow prejudice to thrive." Outside the courtroom, the lawsuit galvanized public opinion. Advocates for racial justice hailed Ariel's courage and the case's potential to set a new standard for corporate responsibility. Social media buzzed with discussions about the broader implications for industries beyond aviation. Within Altura Air, the lawsuit created upheaval. Board members faced pressure to resign, executives were called to testify, and the company's stock plummeted amid fears of prolonged legal and reputational damage. Callie Brent's defense crumbled as more evidence of the company's negligence surfaced. The narrative shifted from a single employee's misconduct to a systemic failure that endangered not only passengers, but the integrity of the airline itself. As the trial progressed, Ariel remained focused on the ultimate goal: reform. She collaborated closely with Marissa to develop proposals for comprehensive changes in hiring, training, and accountability mechanisms within Altura Air and Skylinks charters. The case did not end with a dramatic courtroom verdict. Instead, after months of negotiation and mounting pressure, Altura Air agreed to a settlement. The terms were unprecedented, a 9-figure financial settlement to be used for reparations and systemic reform, the dismissal of key executives responsible for oversight failures, and the establishment of an independent diversity, equity, and inclusion council. Moreover, Ariel's input was formally recognized, granting her a seat on the council to oversee the implementation of reforms and ensure lasting change. In a press release announcing the settlement, Ariel spoke about the significance of the moment. "This is more than a legal victory," she said. "It is a mandate for accountability and a commitment to building a future where respect and dignity are not privileges, but rights afforded to every individual." The Clear Skies Initiative, funded by the settlement, was launched shortly after. Its mission was to provide scholarships, mentorship, and career opportunities for underrepresented women and people of color pursuing careers in aviation and technology. The lawsuit marked a turning point not just for Altura Air, but for the entire industry. It exposed uncomfortable truths and demanded concrete actions. For Ariel Knox, the journey had been arduous, but the impact was profound. What had begun as a moment of personal injustice had blossomed into a catalyst for systemic transformation. The discovery process was grueling. Day after day, Ariel Knox and her legal team sifted through mountains of documents, emails, personnel files, and internal reports that Altura Air and Skylink's charters had tried to keep under wraps. Each piece of evidence uncovered another layer of systemic failure, revealing a culture that had long tolerated, if not encouraged, discrimination behind the glossy facade of luxury and professionalism. Marissa Yun, Ariel's lead attorney, gathered her team in the conference room. Her eyes were sharp as she laid out the damning details. "Let me be clear," Marissa said. "This is not the result of one bad apple. This is a rotten orchard." The team had uncovered multiple reports of complaints from employees and passengers about biased behavior, inappropriate remarks, and even instances of outright harassment. In every case, the complaints had been minimized, ignored, or buried in paperwork. One internal memo had described a senior manager dismissing concerns with the words, "We don't cater to sensitivities here." Another email chain revealed a supervisor advising a flight attendant to keep her opinions to herself after reporting a racially charged incident. Ariel sat quietly as Marissa detailed the findings. The evidence painted a stark picture of an airline whose leadership had failed to implement meaningful diversity training, whose hiring practices overwhelmingly favored white candidates, and whose culture fostered silence and fear among employees of color. Data analytics showed that over the past 7 years, 92% of new hires in client-facing roles were white. Qualified candidates of color were routinely passed over with little explanation. The mandated diversity and inclusion training modules were outdated, perfunctory, and often completed in less than 2 minutes by employees eager to check a box. Ariel reflected on her own experience during the flight, the subtle slights, the outright hostility, the slap. These were not isolated moments, but symptoms of a systemic disease. Noel Stratton sat beside her, nodding in agreement. This evidence is powerful. It's the foundation for demanding real change. The legal team prepared to present the evidence in court and to the media. Transparency was key. Ariel believed that exposing the truth was the first step toward healing and transformation. Public reaction was immediate. News outlets reported extensively on the findings, highlighting the airline's failures and the courage of those who spoke out. Industry experts weighed in, calling for sweeping reforms not just at Altura Air, but across the aviation sector. Amid the media storm, Ariel remained a figure of calm determination. She appeared in interviews, emphasizing the need for systemic accountability and the importance of creating inclusive environments. "This is about respect," she said in one televised segment, "about ensuring that no one faces discrimination or prejudice simply because of who they are." The pressure on Altura Air's leadership intensified. The board of directors demanded resignations from several high-ranking executives implicated in the scandal. CEO Darren Beller faced intense scrutiny, both publicly and privately. At a tense board meeting, Beller was confronted with the evidence and calls for immediate action. Realizing the depth of the crisis, he announced his intention to step down once a suitable successor was found. Meanwhile, Callie Brent was summoned for a deposition. The once confident flight attendant entered the sterile conference room looking diminished. Her face was pale, her posture slumped. The questioning was clinical and relentless. Lawyers focused not on the slap itself, but on the broader context, the failures of training, supervision, and corporate culture that had allowed her behavior to go unchecked. As the hours dragged on, it became clear that Callie was a symptom, not the disease. The system that had enabled her was the real defendant. Ariel's team hammered home this message repeatedly. The goal was not to destroy individuals, but to dismantle the structures that perpetuated injustice. Outside the courtroom, activists and advocates rallied behind Ariel. The case became a symbol of the fight against systemic racism in corporate America. Back in her office, Ariel reviewed the latest reports. The path ahead was still long and uncertain, but the tide was turning. She knew that real change required more than lawsuits and settlements. It demanded commitment, oversight, and a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths. As she looked out her window at the city skyline, Ariel felt a quiet resolve settle over her. The rot had been exposed, and now it was time to rebuild. Months had passed since the incident on the Altura 1, and the world had changed around Ariel Knox in ways both subtle and profound. The lawsuit had been filed, the evidence laid bare, and the pressure on Altura Air was now relentless. Yet amidst the storm, Ariel remained a pillar of calm determination. Her mission was no longer just about herself, or even about a single airline. It was about reshaping an entire industry, about setting a precedent that would ripple far beyond the walls of corporate boardrooms. The settlement negotiations were intense. Altura Air's legal team fought to limit financial exposure and public fallout, while Ariel's attorney stood firm on the demand for meaningful structural reform. The conversations extended late into the night, with marathon calls and carefully crafted statements. Finally, an agreement was reached. Altura Air agreed to pay a 9-figure settlement, the largest in corporate negligence related to racial discrimination in aviation history. But the money was only part of the story. More important were the terms requiring the overhaul of Altura's policies, leadership changes, and the creation of an independent oversight council, on which Ariel would serve. The Clear Skies Initiative was born out of this settlement. Ariel announced it with quiet pride, a foundation dedicated to providing scholarships, mentorship, and career opportunities to women and people of color pursuing paths in aviation, engineering, and technology. The initiative would focus on breaking down the barriers that had long kept these industries homogeneous. In a press conference, Ariel spoke with measured passion. This is not about punishment or retribution. It is about accountability and change. We must dismantle the systems that perpetuate inequality and build new ones rooted in respect, opportunity, and dignity. The announcement was met with widespread acclaim. Advocates celebrated the financial commitment and the promise of systemic reform. Industry leaders pledged their support. The media framed it as a watershed moment, a turning point in the fight for equity in aviation. At Altura Air, the settlement forced a reckoning. CEO Darren Beller stepped down, and a new leadership team was installed, committed publicly to transparency and inclusivity. The airline brought in a nationally recognized diversity, equity, and inclusion consultancy to revamp training and hiring protocols. Within the company, employees found their voices growing stronger. Resource groups formed, encouraging dialogue and education. Employees who had once felt silenced began sharing their experiences, fostering a culture of awareness and respect. For Ariel, the legal victory was a beginning, not an end. She threw herself into the work of the Clear Skies Initiative, meeting with young scholars, hosting mentorship programs, and collaborating with industry partners. The foundation became a beacon of hope and possibility. Noel Stratton managed the growing organization with the same precision and care he had brought to Ariel's corporate affairs. Together, they ensured that the initiative stayed true to its mission, empowering the next generation to soar higher and further. Meanwhile, Callie Brent's life had taken a different turn. She had lost her job at Altura Air and found it nearly impossible to secure new employment in the industry. The fallout from the lawsuit was severe, and the public backlash was unforgiving. In quiet moments, Callie grappled with the weight of her actions and their consequences. She sought counseling and began attending sensitivity and diversity training herself, confronting the biases she had long ignored. It was a difficult journey, marked by regret and self-reflection. Back in her own way, Callie started to understand the depth of the system she had been a part of and the personal responsibility she bore. For Ariel, the road ahead was filled with challenges. The transformation she sought was not instantaneous. Changing culture took time, persistence, and vigilance. Yet with every scholarship awarded, every mentor matched, and every policy rewritten, progress was undeniable. One evening, Ariel stood on the terrace of her city apartment, the skyline shimmering against the darkening sky. Her thoughts drifted to the day of the incident, the slap, the shock, the fight that had followed. It had been a moment of pain, yes, but also a catalyst. She smiled softly, feeling a quiet satisfaction. She had taken a moment of injustice and transformed it into a movement of hope and change. The power of character, she realized, was far greater than the power of money. In the distance, a plane soared overhead, its lights cutting through the night sky. Ariel watched it for a long moment, imagining the journeys it carried: dreams, ambitions, lives in motion. Her own journey was far from over, but this time the path was clear. The year since the incident aboard Altura 1 had passed with the quiet intensity of change unfolding beneath the surface. For Ariel Knox, the journey that had begun with a single moment of injustice had blossomed into something far greater, a movement, a mission, and a legacy. Today, Ariel found herself boarding a commercial flight, a rare occurrence for someone used to private jets and exclusive terminals. The airline was new, one of the many that had responded to the Clear Skies Initiative's call for inclusive and equitable aviation practices. The cabin was warm and welcoming, a subtle but palpable shift from the cold formality she had once endured. As Ariel settled into seat 3A, she noticed the young flight attendant approaching with a genuine smile. The woman's name tag read Maya. Her eyes held a kindness and confidence that spoke of training not just in service, but in empathy. "Welcome aboard, Miss Knox," Maya said warmly. "We're honored to have you." Ariel smiled, touched by the sincerity. "Thank you, Maya. It's good to be here." Across the aisle, a little girl tugged at her mother's sleeve and whispered, "Mommy, is that the lady from the plane story?" The mother nodded. "Yes, baby. She's the one who stood up for what's right." The child's eyes were wide with admiration, and Ariel's heart swelled with a quiet joy. This was the reason for every battle fought, every speech given, every policy changed. As the plane ascended, Ariel gazed out the window at the sprawling city below, lights twinkling like distant stars. The sky stretched endlessly, a vast canvas of possibility and promise. Her thoughts wandered back to the days of struggle, the slap, the silence that followed, the courtroom, the settlement. Those moments had been painful, yes, but they had also been the spark that ignited transformation. She thought of the countless young women and men who had received scholarships through the Clear Skies Initiative, the pilots, engineers, and executives who now walked halls that had once been closed to them. The journey toward equality was far from complete, but the path was clearer than ever. Ariel folded her hands in her lap and breathed deeply. She had learned that true strength was not in the wealth or status one held, but in the courage to confront injustice and the wisdom to build a better future. The plane's engines hummed steadily, carrying her forward. For Ariel Knox, the sky was no longer a limit, but a beginning. This story reminds us that the fight against discrimination is far from over. The actions of one flight attendant did not just wound Ariel Knox. They exposed a system that too often devalues and dismisses people based on appearance and race. But from that painful moment grew a powerful movement of accountability and change, showing us the true meaning of dignity and resilience. We honor Ariel's courage to stand firm with grace, and we call out the prejudice and ignorance that still linger in places of privilege. No one should ever have to prove their worth or fight for respect because of their skin color. Thank you for listening to this story. If it touched your heart or opened your eyes, please like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel for more impactful true stories. Your support helps amplify voices that need to be heard and keeps the conversation alive. Stay tuned for our next video, where we continue to explore stories of justice, hope, and the power of standing up for what is right.